that Donald Trump will become the 47th President of the United States.
Donald Trump is back in the White House, and his America First agenda has sparked intense reactions and raised many questions within the Caribbean community in the United States and across the diaspora. Caribbean Americans, many of whom have roots in nations that rely on U.S. foreign policies for economic and social stability, are in for some sweeping changes that could have far-reaching implications you need to know about. With control over both chambers of Congress, the Trump's administration is ready to reshape U.S. Caribbean policies, from economic disruptions to environmental challenges, trade wars, immigration, foreign aid, and climate policy. Welcome to Caribbean Focus. In this video, we're taking a close look at one of the most important questions facing the Caribbean today. What does a new Trump presidency mean for Caribbean-U.S. relations? That is the question we are going to tackle today. On Tuesday, November 5th, the United States had what many consider the most consequential election in its nearly 250-year history. Former President Donald Trump defeated Vice President Kamala Harris to become the second person in U.S. history to be elected to non-consecutive presidential terms in the White House, and the 47th President of the United States in a resounding win.
Well, I want to thank you all very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends on this incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before. Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond.
Trump and his supporters believe this victory represents a clear mandate from the American people, emboldening him to make bold, sweeping changes to the country's direction. With his decisive win, Trump has stated that this mandate justifies his vision to implement major policy shifts and reaffirm his America First approach, setting the stage for a new chapter in U.S. governance. Donald Trump and the Republican Party scored a decisive victory in a deeply divided nation, rebutting many naysayers and the Democratic Party. Trump not only won the Electoral College with a commanding 312 electoral victory over Vice Presidential Harris's 226 Electoral College votes, he also became the first Republican candidate to win the popular vote since President George H.W. Bush won in 1988. Securing almost 75 million votes, Trump led the Republican Party to flip the U.S. Senate and is expected to maintain control of the House of Representatives. With such a decisive victory over the executive and legislative branches of the U.S. government, it is expected that a Donald Trump presidency will only be even more emboldened than his previous term. During his first term, Trump's policy initiatives were often tempered by congressional opposition and at times by a lack of popular support. However, with little congressional pushback expected under a Republican-controlled legislature, and a Supreme Court which has upheld many of his positions, there will likely be little resistance as Trump assumes the office of president in 2025. Control of both chambers of Congress would allow Trump to advance his most ambitious legislative priorities with fewer obstacles. Key conservative initiatives like immigration reform, tax cuts, healthcare changes, and the rollback of regulatory policies have already been discussed by the president-elect, and this alignment would likely enable a faster and more sweeping implementation of his policies. So how will an emboldened and unrestrained Donald Trump affect the Caribbean? Well, we at Caribbean Focus see four main ways Trump's America First approach will impact the region and the world at large. 1. Immigration. 2. Foreign aid. 3. Trades. And 4. Climate change. The first big impact on the region is expected to come from reduced foreign aid and policy engagement.
The United States is the world's largest giver in the world by far of foreign aid, but few give anything to us. That is why we are taking a hard look at U.S. foreign assistance. We will examine what is working, what is not working, and whether the countries who receive our dollars and our protection also have our interests at heart.
President Trump has been a longtime critic of foreign aid and his America First policy will most likely see the biggest reduction in U.S. foreign aid since his original presidency. U.S. total global aid in 2023 was $61 billion, half of which went to 10 countries, principally Ukraine at $16.4 billion and Israel at $3.3 billion. The Biden administration provided nearly $2.5 billion in foreign assistance to Latin America and the Caribbean in 2024, $427.3 million more than in 2023. All 14 independent CARICOM countries received approximately $456.2 million in aid from the superpower, of which $393.8 million went exclusively to Haiti, leaving $62.4 million for the remaining 13 countries. Under a Trump presidency, the region can expect this number to drop to nearly zero, similar to what happened back in 2016. This reduction in foreign aid is also expected to impact regional institutions such as the Inter-American Development Bank, which funds several regional projects throughout the Caribbean in the areas of disaster preparedness, healthcare, and infrastructure, particularly the most vulnerable countries like Haiti. Not to mention the expected support the region might receive after a natural disaster in terms of logistical support and other soft services. Secondly, the Caribbean can expect to see price and trade shocks as President Trump's administration pursues its new trade policy.
Now the Washington Post is saying that you're talking about 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. Is that in the cards?
No, I would say maybe it's going to be more than that.
Mr. Trump has constantly iterated his dissatisfaction with the U.S. balance of trade surplus with several countries, particularly China. During this election, he advocated for a universal minimum tariff of 10% on all imports, with higher rates on specific sectors or from certain countries. When it comes to trade, the CARICOM region and CARICOM countries are in a relatively good place. The U.S. has enjoyed a persistent balance of trade surplus with CARICOM countries collectively. This means that the Caribbean imports more from the United States than the United States imports from the Caribbean. For example, in 2023, the Caribbean imported $7.4 billion more in products that were exported, meaning that a tariff on Caribbean exports may not be as damaging as for other countries. However, with such a sweeping policy of blanket tariffs, the impact on U.S. product prices, which the region extensively relies on, may be unpredictable and would most likely lead to at least some negative impact on the products we import. On the bright side, this increase in tariffs on imports the U.S. is looking to impose to shore up local manufacturing is leading other countries, particularly China, to hedge their economies for an upcoming change in the world economic order. As countries like China and the EU are expected to see reduced exports to the U.S., the opportunity arises for the Caribbean to seize possible exports from these countries, particularly on products such as electric cars, solar panels, and battery technology. And possibly the most impactful change to the region will come in the administration's new approach to climate change. President Donald Trump has long downplayed the reality of climate change and during his first presidency notably withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement. He further expanded U.S. oil and gas production, removing regulations that impede fossil fuel extraction through fracking. It can be expected that as a skeptic, President Donald Trump would likely roll back many of the United States' climate initiatives, with a return to policies favoring fossil fuel industries over renewable energy.
President-elect Donald Trump has promised to undo several of his predecessors' climate policies aimed at carbon emissions once he takes office in January. While he was on the campaign trail, he called global warming a scam and also said he would eliminate the Inflation Reduction Act, which is President Biden's signature climate initiative, and instead focus on oil and gas production.
I will approve new drilling, new pipelines, new refineries, new power plants, new reactors, and we will slash the red tape. It used to be global warming, and that wasn't working because we're actually cooling. So they talk all the time about the ocean will rise in 500 years, 1/8 of an inch. Who the hell cares, okay?
New Trump policies will pose difficulties for Caribbean countries which are among the worst affected by extreme weather conditions, including global warming and sea level rise. Specifically, Trump's stance could lead to the scaling back of emissions targets, fewer incentives for green technology, and even the repeal of the Green New Deal and sections of the Inflation Reduction Act, which had set aside massive federal investment in climate resilience projects. On the world stage, the U.S. would likely play a diminished role in climate leadership, which could weaken global efforts to combat climate change, putting additional pressure on vulnerable regions and contributing to the acceleration of environmental impacts worldwide. While these are the main areas of concern expected under a new Trump administration, there are still many other actions we can expect a new President Trump to do which will have deep effects on the Caribbean. One of the Trump administration's most impactful areas of policy for the Caribbean will likely be immigration.
This morning, President-elect Trump signaling a major move on immigration, responding true to a post on his social media platform, saying he will declare a national emergency and use military assets for a mass deportation program.
The Republican platform promises to launch the largest deportation operation in the history of our country. We must use any and all resources needed to stop the invasion, including moving thousands of troops currently stationed overseas.
Trump has vowed to carry out the largest deportation in American history when he takes office, with estimates stating that upwards of 1 million migrants are to be deported. Tighter immigration laws and increased deportations of Caribbean nationals are likely to have economic and social effects on the region, as many Caribbean families rely on remittances sent from relatives living and working in the United States. Furthermore, immigration pathways for skilled and unskilled Caribbean workers are expected to decrease as President Trump pursues his closed border approach to immigration, particularly for Haitian migrants who received protections under the Biden administration. Additionally, the Trump administration took a hardline stance on Venezuela back during his presidency, seeking to isolate its government. This approach had implications for nearby Caribbean nations that have historical, cultural, and economic ties with Venezuela. The policy often placed Caribbean nations in a difficult diplomatic position, balancing between U.S. expectations and their own interests in the region. This approach is expected to continue when he returns. However, it can be said that Caribbean-Venezuela relations have deteriorated over the last 4 years due to the territorial dispute between Venezuela and its Caribbean neighbor, Guyana. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your likes help the YouTube algorithm promote our videos, allowing others to enjoy this content too. Thanks for your continued support. Finally, general collaboration between the Caribbean and the US is most likely going to decrease under a new Trump presidency. Under the Biden administration, Caribbean collaboration had been strong, and it was hoped that the first black and female president of Jamaican descent would continue this trajectory. However, as President Trump assumes office, policy collaboration between the US and the Caribbean is expected to decline, as an America-first approach would likely prioritize US domestic and economic interests over regional partnerships. In areas such as climate change, disaster preparedness, trade, and immigration, Trump's administration is likely to focus less on multilateral agreements and more on policies that protect US industries and interests. So as much of the world prepares for a return to the old, a new Trump presidency would present complex challenges for the Caribbean, impacting the region across economic, environmental, and social dimensions. Reduced foreign aid, a pending trade war, and a potential rollback in US climate commitments could strain Caribbean economies and hinder efforts to address critical issues like disaster resilience, economic sustainability, and infrastructure development. As the US adopts a more insular America-first approach, Caribbean nations may find themselves needing to seek alternative partnerships, potentially altering the region's geopolitical landscape. Over the years, as the region has embraced new geopolitical partnerships with China, Europe, and Africa, we should expect to see a further pivot away from the US and a return to what many are considering the status quo of American insularism. Overall, a second Trump term could amplify the Caribbean's vulnerability to external shocks while reducing the stability and support it has historically received from the US, creating a more uncertain future for the region, at least in the near term. Check out this video on why Kamala Harris lost the US presidential election. We'd love to hear from you. How do you think Trump's America First policies will impact the Caribbean the most through immigration, trade, or climate change? And what changes do you think Caribbean nations should prioritize in response? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you received value from this video, please share, like, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. This is Caribbean Focus. See you in the next video.